This story is a work of historical horror fiction, inspired by real names, places, and events. While certain figures, such as Lady Almina Carnarvon or religious convents, are based on documented history, the narrative you are about to read mixes fact with fiction, speculation, and dramatic reconstruction. It is not meant to accuse, slander, or disrespect any religion, family, or institution. Instead, it seeks to explore the dark undercurrents of secrecy, power, and human frailty within historical settings. All characters, except where clearly based on public historical figures, are purely fictional. Any resemblance to real individuals, living or dead, is coincidental. The themes within include violence, corruption, and horror. Reader discretion is strongly advised. The convent of St. Mary's stood like a cold sentinel on the edge of the moors. Its stone walls, weathered by centuries of rain and wind, had turned a dull gray-green, streaked with moss. Travelers passing along the narrow dirt road that wound toward the village often crossed themselves as they glanced at it. For though it was a place of God, there was something about the convent's silence that unsettled the soul. By day, the convent appeared serene, orderly, a fortress of prayer and discipline. The nuns moved in quiet rows, their black habits rippling in the wind like wings of crows. Bells tolled in rhythm with the hours, announcing prayers, meals, and nightly retreats. To the villagers, the sisters were the image of holiness, women who had renounced the world to live for Christ alone. But at night, strange whispers drifted across the fields. Farmhands claimed they heard soft chanting, not the harmonious hymns of worship but low, discordant murmurs that rose and fell like an incantation. Some said they saw candlelight flickering in the windows at forbidden hours, long after Compline prayers should have ended. A few claimed to hear muffled sobs carried on the wind, as though someone were weeping within those walls, or beneath them. The convent's mother superior, an austere woman named Sister Agnes, dismissed such talk as nonsense. She was a woman of strict discipline, her thin lips often pursed as though forever tasting bitterness. The devil thrives on idle gossip, she would tell the villagers when rumors began to spread. Do not feed him with your tongues. And for most, that was the end of the matter. After all, who would dare question the sanctity of women cloistered in prayer? Yet unease lingered. One farmer, old Thomas, swore he had seen a young girl in white at the edge of the convent's graveyard one dawn. Not a nun, mind you, he insisted to his drinking companions at the tavern. A girl young, no more than 15, pale as the moon, and she vanished when I called out. They laughed at him, but his eyes were wide with fear. She weren't no ghost, he muttered, draining his ale. She were one o' the missing ones. For in truth, the convent had been touched by mystery before. Records kept in the village parish noted several young women, apprentices or novitiates, who had entered the convent but never appeared again. No final vows, no transfers, no burials. The explanations were always simple: illness, family recall, divine calling elsewhere. But the numbers mounted slowly over decades, and when one compared the lists, the absences became hard to ignore. The villagers whispered of runaways, that the strict life of prayer and fasting had driven some girls mad, causing them to flee into the woods. But others suggested darker fates. Secret punishments, illnesses covered up, or perhaps sins too shameful to be revealed. Inside the convent, the younger nuns were discouraged from speaking of such matters. Silence was a virtue, obedience a command. Curiosity is the first step toward sin, Sister Agnes would say, and any novice who asked too many questions about the past was punished with fasting or long hours in the cold chapel on her knees. But still, whispers spread even among the sisters. Novice Clara, barely 17, confessed in hushed tones to her dormitory companions that she often heard scratching sounds in the night, as though something clawed at the stones beneath the floor. Another, Sister Margaret, claimed she saw Sister Agnes carrying bundles down into the catacombs beneath the convent chapel. Bundles shaped like small bodies. When pressed, Margaret grew pale and swore she must have imagined it, for such thoughts were blasphemy. It was not only the nuns who whispered. The local priest, Father Bernard, a man of nearly 60 with a face carved by years of confession, harbored his own suspicions. He had seen the convent books, the irregular entries, the disappearances masked by vague explanations. Yet he dared not speak openly, for the convent was under the patronage of powerful noble families. To question it was to question the very pillars of the church's authority. Still, his sermons grew heavier with warnings. Beware false piety, for the devil wears holy robes when it suits him. Outside, the world of England was shifting, whispers of reform, of new scientific discoveries, of challenges to the church's long dominance. But in the quiet village near St. Mary's, the old fears still held sway. To accuse the convent was dangerous, perhaps even heretical. Better to hold one's tongue than risk the wrath of God, or worse, the wrath of those who claimed to speak for him. And so the convent remained a paradox, a place of prayer, yet shadowed by dread, a fortress of faith, yet riddled with secrets. For those who lived near it, the whispers behind holy walls were as much a part of life as the cawing of crows or the tolling of the morning bell. The year was 1831 when change first arrived at the gates of St. Mary's. The world outside was shifting in ways the cloistered nuns could not imagine. London bustled with political unrest. Industrial machines rattled in new factories, and newspapers carried scandalous tales of reformers, rebels, and explorers. Even in the sleepy village shadowed by the convent's gray towers, the ripples of this wider world were beginning to reach. One winter's morning, two strangers rode into the village on horseback. Their arrival caused quite a stir, for it was rare to see outsiders, much less ones dressed in such fine yet practical attire. The elder of the two was a man of perhaps 45, tall, lean, with a face that bore both sternness and fatigue. His name was Jonathan Hale, a solicitor from London who claimed to have been sent on matters of inheritance concerning one of the noble families connected to the convent. His companion was younger, a woman of about 23, with auburn hair pinned neatly under a bonnet and sharp eyes that missed little. She was introduced as Miss Eleanor Blackwood, his assistant and researcher. The villagers eyed them with a mix of suspicion and fascination. Outsiders always brought questions, and questions were dangerous things in a community bound by silence. When Jonathan inquired at the tavern about lodging, the innkeeper hesitated before finally offering a room. "Best not go pryin' round St. Mary's," he muttered, sliding a mug of ale across the table. "The sisters don't take kindly to strangers." Jonathan smiled politely but said nothing. Eleanor, however, leaned in, her voice low. "We're not here to cause trouble, only to seek the truth about certain disappearances." That word, disappearances, made the innkeeper stiffen. He crossed himself and looked away. Best not speak o' such things. By the next morning, whispers of the newcomers had already spread. Some said they were government spies, others that they were Protestant agitators come to stir scandal against the convent. Children followed Eleanor at a distance when she walked through the market, daring each other to ask her where she came from. She only smiled faintly, jotting notes in a small leather-bound book she carried everywhere. Jonathan's first official visit was to Father Bernard, the parish priest. The old man received him in his modest rectory, lined with dusty books and icons. "What business do you truly have here?" Bernard asked, his voice wary. Jonathan set down his briefcase and produced several letters. They bore the seal of the Carnarvon family, powerful patrons of St. Mary's. A young woman, Margaret Carnarvon, was sent here as a novice nearly a year ago, Jonathan explained. Her family has had no correspondence from her since. The convent claims she has withdrawn to another house, yet no such records exist. I have been instructed to confirm her welfare or her death. Father Bernard's lined face grew pale. He poured 2 cups of weak tea with trembling hands. "You are treading upon sacred ground, Mr. Hale. The sisters answer only to their order and to God. To question them is no small matter." "I question not their faith," Jonathan replied coolly. "Only their honesty." Eleanor, who had remained quiet until then, added gently, "We believe the truth has been hidden too long, Father. Others have vanished before Margaret. Have they not?" The old priest's eyes darted to the crucifix above the fireplace. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a low voice, he confessed, "There are names, too many names. Girls who entered and were never seen again. But I can do nothing. If I speak, I risk excommunication. Worse." Jonathan nodded grimly. "Then we must act in your stead." The next day, Jonathan requested an audience at the convent. The gates of St. Mary's were high and iron-wrought, creaking open only after a long wait. They were greeted by Sister Agnes herself, the Mother Superior. Her presence was commanding, her veil and habit pristine, her eyes cold and appraising. "Solicitor Hale," she said in a voice both sharp and serene, "your arrival was foretold to me. The Carnarvons are impatient." Jonathan inclined his head respectfully. "Indeed, Mother Superior. They seek assurance that Margaret is well." "She has been transferred to another convent," Agnes replied without hesitation. "Her calling led her elsewhere. She no longer belongs to St. Mary's." "Then surely you can provide the transfer papers," Jonathan pressed. A thin smile crossed Sister Agnes's lips. "I regret to inform you, our records are sealed. The Carnarvons will receive word in due course." Eleanor's sharp eyes caught a flicker in Agnes's composure, the briefest tightening of her jaw, a shadow of irritation. Eleanor decided to probe further. "Forgive me, Mother Superior, but would it not be a comfort to Lady Carnarvon to receive even a letter in Margaret's own hand? I should be glad to deliver it myself." Sister Agnes's expression hardened. "The affairs of this convent are not the concern of strangers. You may deliver my assurance, nothing more." The gates closed behind them with a resounding clang. That night, Jonathan and Eleanor stayed awake late at the inn, poring over notes and testimonies gathered from the villagers. Patterns emerged. Names of novices who had entered St. Mary's over the past 20 years and vanished without trace. Families told the same stories. Vague letters, sudden claims of transfers, silence thereafter. Eleanor tapped her pen against the page. "It is not only Margaret. There are at least 15 others. Perhaps more." Jonathan rubbed his temples. "If records are falsified, then the convent is complicit in deception. Perhaps worse. But without proof we can do nothing. The Carnarvons will not act on suspicion alone." At that moment, a knock came at the inn's door. When Jonathan opened it, he found a girl standing in the shadows, barely 16, with tangled hair and frightened eyes. She looked as though she had run for miles. "Please," she whispered, "you must help me." Her name was Anna, and she claimed to have escaped from St. Mary's only 2 nights before. Her story spilled out in sobs. The locked dormitories, the cruel punishments, the cries she heard at night from the cellars beneath the chapel. "They said it was the devil," she choked, "that those taken below were possessed. But I know they never came back." Eleanor took the girl's trembling hand. "Anna, you are safe now. We will protect you." Jonathan's eyes burned with determination. "Then it is true," he muttered. "Whatever lies behind those walls is not of God." The arrival of outsiders, Jonathan, Eleanor, and now Anna, was like a stone cast into stagnant water. The ripples would spread, breaking the still surface of silence that had shrouded the convent for decades. And as they began their investigation, the secrets of St. Mary's stirred, restless and dangerous, eager to remain buried. Night inside St. Mary's was unlike night anywhere else. The village slept under the comfort of hearth fires and the steady breath of livestock in their barns. But within the convent walls, darkness pressed down with a suffocating weight. Torches along the cloisters were extinguished promptly after Compline prayers, and silence was enforced with iron discipline. Any sound, a cough, a whimper, a restless shuffle was punished. But Eleanor had already begun to suspect that silence in the convent was an illusion. Anna's whispered testimony confirmed it. The nights were never truly silent. Anna spoke of shadows moving when they should not, of footsteps echoing long after the sisters had retired, and of strange chanting rising from beneath the chapel floor. She described bundles being carried down to the catacombs by the older nuns, heavy, cloth-wrapped, and smelling faintly of iron and herbs. "They told us not to ask," she said, her eyes wide with remembered terror. If we looked too long, we were beaten. If we spoke, we were sent below too. And those who went below never came back. Jonathan listened grimly, jotting down her words. Bundles, he murmured. Bodies, perhaps. Or infants. At this, Anna began to sob, covering her face with her thin hands. Yes, she whispered. I heard crying once, a baby's cry, then silence. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be true? Could the convent, a place outwardly devoted to purity, have become a secret chamber for forbidden acts, illegal abortions, perhaps even worse? The next morning, Jonathan set about gathering evidence. He bribed a stable boy to deliver a message to a clerk in London, requesting access to diocesan archives. Eleanor, meanwhile, sought conversation with the villagers, approaching them under the guise of a curious traveler. Piece by piece, fragments of truth emerged. A midwife who claimed she was once summoned to the convent for mysterious illnesses. A gravedigger who swore the nuns sometimes delivered coffins sealed shut, forbidding him to look inside. One account chilled Eleanor most of all. An elderly woman, toothless and bent, whispered to her over a basket of eggs. I saw him years ago. Men, not priests, brought to the convent by night. Gentlemen in fine coats. They went in laughing and left pale as ghosts. Mark me, girl, them walls hold more than prayers. They hold sins wrapped in holy cloth. Eleanor recorded it all, her notebook filling with testimonies that painted a portrait of corruption. The convent was no sanctuary of faith but a fortress of secrecy, hiding practices both forbidden and profane. Yet evidence was not proof, and to confront Sister Agnes with rumor was to risk immediate expulsion or worse. Jonathan knew they would need to see it themselves. We must get inside, he told Eleanor, his jaw set. Not as guests, as intruders. If there are tunnels below the chapel, we must find them. Only then will the truth reveal itself. The night they chose was cold, with a pale moon drifting behind ragged clouds. Jonathan and Eleanor dressed in dark cloaks, carrying only a lantern covered with cloth to dim its glow. Anna, though frightened, insisted on guiding them to the place where she had last seen the nuns descend. Beneath the chapel, she whispered, her voice trembling. There is a door in the sacristy. They keep it locked, but I know where they hide the key. The convent loomed before them, silent and brooding. They scaled a section of the outer wall where ivy grew thick, Anna scrambling nimbly despite her fear. Inside the cloistered garden, the air felt different, heavier, as if it carried centuries of whispered prayers mixed with darker secrets. The great chapel rose at the center, its stained glass windows black in the moonlight. Moving swiftly, Anna led them along the shadows to a side door. She reached beneath a loose stone and retrieved a small, rusted key. Her hand shook as she passed it to Jonathan. I was beaten for knowing this, she murmured. If they catch me, Jonathan squeezed her shoulder. They will not. Not tonight. Inside, the sacristy smelled of incense and damp stone. Cabinets of vestments lined the walls, their embroidered gold threads catching what little light escaped from the lantern. Anna guided them to a heavy oaken door half hidden behind a curtain. Jonathan inserted the key, and with a groan the lock yielded. The air that wafted from below was foul, a mingling of mildew and something metallic, the unmistakable tang of blood. Eleanor covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Dear God, she whispered. They descended a narrow staircase, the stones slick with moisture. The passage opened into a low chamber, lit dimly by stubs of candles. What they saw froze them in place. Against the walls were pallets, rough beds stained with fluids, covered in discarded cloths. Basins of darkened water stood nearby, along with crude surgical instruments laid upon a table. Hooks hung from the ceiling, some still bearing chains. The chamber reeked of suffering. Eleanor felt bile rise in her throat. This is not holy work. Anna clung to her, weeping silently. Jonathan, grim-faced, examined the instruments. Some were rusted, others newly sharpened. A ledger lay upon the table, filled with names and numbers. His hands shook as he flipped the pages. These are records, he muttered. Dates, Initials, payments. Eleanor peered over his shoulder. Each entry listed a woman's name, followed by a sum of money and a note. Taken below, cured, lost to fever. Some had a single mark beside them. A small cross, drawn in red ink. Jonathan's lantern flickered across the chamber walls, and in its trembling glow, Eleanor noticed something more. Behind the surgical table, half concealed by a tattered curtain, stood another doorway. Unlike the stair above, this was not shaped by masons but hacked crudely into the stone. The edges were jagged, blackened by smoke. She pulled the curtain aside. A deeper tunnel yawned beyond, exhaling a cold draft that carried with it the faintest sound. A moan, low and guttural, as if someone still breathed in the darkness. Eleanor stepped back. "There are more rooms," she whispered. "Perhaps prisoners." Anna clutched her sleeve. "Don't go in there. That's where they take the ones marked for punishment." Her voice cracked. "Once, they dragged a sister who questioned Agnes. We never saw her again." Jonathan's jaw clenched. He passed the ledger to Eleanor. "Hold on to this. Whatever lies beyond, we must know. But if I don't return—" "You will," Eleanor cut in fiercely. "We came together. We go forward together." With Anna between them, they moved into the tunnel. The air grew colder with each step, the walls narrowing, dripping with moisture. The sound grew clearer. Not just moans, but whispers, muttered prayers, some in Latin, others in broken pleas for mercy. The passage opened into a larger cavern. There, chained against the wall, were figures, thin, wasted women in soiled habits, their faces pale as wax. Some lifted their heads weakly at the lantern's light. Others remained motionless, perhaps already dead. Anna gasped. "Sisters?" One of the women stirred, her cracked lips moving. "Help us," she rasped. Her wrists were raw where iron had bitten through flesh. Eleanor rushed forward, fumbling at the chains. Jonathan, horrified, shone the lantern higher, and his heart froze. For in the center of the cavern was a crude altar, stained dark with years of sacrifice. Above it hung a crucifix, but the Christ figure had been defiled, its face scorched black, its eyes gouged out. Around the base lay tiny bones, too small to be mistaken for adult remains. Eleanor followed his gaze. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Infants!" Anna began to sob uncontrollably. "They told us it was God's will, that sin must be purged, that those born in secret had no right to life." Jonathan's face hardened. "No," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "This is not God's will. This is human corruption, dressed in holy robes." Suddenly, from the tunnel behind, a sound echoed, the sharp strike of a bell. It was the convent's midnight chime. With it came footsteps, many of them, descending the stair they had left open. Eleanor froze. "They know we're here." Jonathan extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. The whispers of the chained sisters rose into desperate cries, echoing through the cavern like the voices of the damned. And in that suffocating blackness, as the footsteps drew nearer, Eleanor realized that what they had uncovered was not merely corruption. It was a hidden world of horrors that had festered beneath St. Mary's for decades. The Countess was now in complete despair. Her desperate gamble, exchanging her dead child for the living one of the enslaved woman, had preserved her public image but destroyed her private soul. The more she looked at the child, the more she was reminded of the sin she had committed. The baby's features bore traces of the enslaved lineage, a resemblance she feared others would eventually notice. She began to impose strange rituals upon herself, convinced that penance might absolve her of guilt. She donated lavishly to the church, attended confessions, and even isolated herself from society for weeks. Yet the whispers in the town only grew louder. The enslaved community also carried rumors that one of their own had lost a child under mysterious circumstances, and that the Countess's baby had appeared too suddenly, too conveniently. The enslaved mother, meanwhile, had descended into quiet madness. She wandered the plantation grounds at night, whispering lullabies to no one. Some claimed they saw her cradle invisible arms, Others said she screamed into the fields, cursing the house of the Countess. When she was eventually found dead near the riverbank, whether drowned by despair or silenced by others, her passing was marked by unnatural occurrences. The mansion itself seemed to revolt against its inhabitants. Servants reported doors slamming on their own, chandeliers trembling though no wind blew, and strange crying echoing through the nursery long after the child had been removed. By 1831, the dynasty that had once stood unshakable was collapsing. Business partners withdrew, family allies turned their backs, and whispers of scandal spread across state lines. The Countess was left with wealth but no peace. Her name was forever marked by the unholy pact she had sealed. The curse of that exchange, 2 babies, one dead, one living, switched under the veil of secrecy, was said to have destroyed every descendant of the dynasty. None lived past their youth. The legend of the deadly pact of 1831 still lingers, a haunting tale of pride, sin, and punishment that warns. Not all debts can be buried, and some bargains echo across generations. Coffin twist ending. When the mansion was abandoned decades later, explorers claimed they found 2 tiny cribs in the nursery, one untouched, pristine as if waiting for a baby, and the other stained with something dark, as though the curse itself had left a mark. Years after the scandal had seemingly faded, the estate remained steeped in fear. Visitors who stayed overnight in the mansion reported hearing the sound of 2 infants crying at the same time. One wailing in anguish, the other soft and soothing, as though calling for its mother. No matter how far the nursery was sealed or locked, the sounds carried through the halls. The Countess, who lived in isolation by then, avoided the nursery at all costs. Yet she admitted privately to a priest that she often saw a shadowed figure of a woman rocking an unseen child in the corner of her chambers. The priest urged her to repent publicly, to reveal the truth of the exchange, but she refused. To confess would mean disgrace not just for her but for generations of her bloodline. Instead, she clung to silence. But silence only deepened the curse. One by one, her children fell victim to strange illnesses. Some died in infancy, others in adolescence, their deaths unexplained by medicine of the time. Rumor had it that the enslaved woman's spirit collected each child, one after the other, in retribution for the life stolen from her arms. By the mid-19th century, the family's name had dwindled to almost nothing. The once mighty dynasty that commanded land, wealth, and respect had become a ghost of its former self. The estate was sold, resold, and finally abandoned. Travelers passing by often avoided even looking at the towering house, calling it the House of Exchanged Souls. When the Civil War swept through the South, soldiers who bivouacked near the estate claimed they heard lullabies drifting across the night air in a voice that was not human. Low, broken, and mournful. A few entered the house, but none stayed long. The most famous account came from a Union soldier who swore he saw a woman in tattered clothes holding a pale, silent child. When she looked up, he said her face was both young and ancient at once, and her eyes burned with grief. By the early 1900s, the mansion was left in ruins. Only the nursery remained strangely intact, untouched by decay. Local folklore claimed that the pact, the stolen child and the dead one, still lingered there, replaying itself through time like a wound that never healed. Coffin final twist. In 1931, exactly a century after the pact, a historian studying the dynasty uncovered a sealed family journal. In it, the Countess had written her final confession. "The child I raised was never mine, and so heaven claimed what belonged to another. I am the thief of a cradle, and all my line must pay." As the 20th century marched forward, the legend of the pact only grew darker. The ruined estate became a place of pilgrimage for thrill-seekers, historians, and spiritualists alike. Locals whispered that no one who entered the nursery after sunset ever came back the same. Some claimed their hair turned white overnight, while others reported recurring dreams of 2 infants, one drenched in blood, the other swaddled in fine silks. By the 1940s, a wave of paranormal investigators began documenting the estate. A team led by Dr. William Harcourt, a psychologist fascinated with trauma-based hauntings, spent 3 nights in the mansion. He noted that each member of his team experienced different manifestations. One heard lullabies, another saw shadows pacing the hallways, and one woman awoke to find the impression of a baby's handprint on her wrist. Harcourt later wrote, "This house is not merely haunted, it breathes vengeance. The air itself carries the grief of a mother robbed of her child." The story reached national newspapers in the 1960s after a group of teenagers broke into the mansion. They reported that while exploring the upper floors, they found the nursery door ajar. Inside, the rocking chair moved on its own. When one boy dared to sit in it, he claimed he felt a weight pressed into his lap, as if an invisible infant had been placed there. Terrified, the group fled, but according to local police records, one of the boys stopped speaking for nearly 6 months afterward. By the 1980s, the mansion was nothing more than a crumbling ruin, but its reputation only intensified. A developer attempted to buy the land and tear down the remnants to build a hotel, but construction crews refused to work after repeated accidents. Tools went missing, scaffolding collapsed, and one worker swore he saw a woman in 19th-century clothing standing among the trees, cradling something in her arms. The most chilling account came in 1991, when a pair of travelers got lost near the ruins and took shelter inside. They later reported to authorities that they awoke in the night to see 2 children standing at the foot of their sleeping bags. One child, pale and ghostly, whispered, "I am not hers," before both figures vanished. Today, the ruins remain fenced off, declared unsafe for visitors. Yet the legend continues to draw curious souls. Some bring offerings, dolls, flowers, or baby clothes, leaving them at the broken gates of the estate. Many say the offerings are found moved the next morning, as though accepted or rejected by unseen hands. Pushpin chilling modern twist. In 2011, during a restoration effort funded by a historical society, workers uncovered a small box hidden in the nursery wall. Inside was a tiny rattle made of ivory, stained dark with age. The artifact was sent for analysis, and scientists confirmed traces of human blood embedded in its carvings. By the 21st century, the story of the dynasty had become part of American Gothic folklore. Writers, podcasters, and ghost hunters all found themselves circling back to the cursed estate, each eager to uncover what really happened on that fateful night in 1831. Yet, no matter how much history was dissected, the heart of the tale, the stolen cradle, refused to rest. In 2015, a popular ghost hunting show filmed an episode at the site. Despite the mansion being mostly rubble, their cameras captured unexplained audio. Faint but unmistakable cries of 2 babies overlapping in the background. Later in the same episode, one of the crew members was scratched down her back by what looked like infant-sized fingernails. Viewers flooded forums debating whether the show had faked the evidence, but locals insisted the incident was authentic. Some families in the nearby town still claim they are descendants of the enslaved woman. Oral traditions passed down through generations say that her spirit continues to wander, searching for justice. One descendant, interviewed in 2018, said, "My great-grandmother told me the curse won't end until the bones of both babies lie together again. The Countess broke the natural order, and nothing can mend it until the truth is honored." That same year, archaeologists conducting a small excavation near the grounds uncovered a child-sized coffin buried apart from the family cemetery. Disturbingly, the coffin was empty. Historians speculated it was meant for the Countess's own child, the one that had died, but never actually interred. The discovery reignited old fears that the spirits were still restless. Even now, paranormal tourists brave the crumbling foundations. Many bring digital recorders, convinced that they can capture evidence of the nursery's lingering voices. More often than not, they return with muffled static, but sometimes, faint words emerge. "Mine, not hers." The legend has become so intertwined with American history that it blurs the line between documented fact and enduring myth. Scholars argue endlessly over whether the pact was real or an embellished rumor meant to vilify the aristocracy of the time. But those who have stood within the ruins do not need convincing. They describe an unnatural chill, the smell of decay mixed with lavender, and a heavy silence that presses against the lungs. Coffin final present-day twist. In 2021, during a lightning storm, a photographer captured an eerie image of the ruins. In the shattered frame of the nursery window, two faint figures appeared. A woman clutching a bundle and beside her, a pale child staring outward. Experts dismissed it as a trick of light and rain, but those who know the legend whispered that the Pact of 1831 had revealed itself once more. By the mid-2020s, the legend had crossed from whispered folklore into popular culture. Podcasts dissected it, horror novelists drew inspiration from it, and true crime historians debated how much of it was fact versus myth. But what kept the tale alive wasn't only the historical documents. It was the unshakable present-day accounts that continued to surface. In 2023, a group of urban explorers live-streamed their night inside the ruins. Thousands of viewers watched in real time as their equipment malfunctioned. One of the men entered the nursery with a handheld camera. The feed went dark for 12 seconds. When it returned, the man was gone. Search and rescue teams scoured the estate for 3 days but never recovered his body. His friends swore they heard a baby's laugh echoing moments before he disappeared. Descendants of the dynasty, those few who remained, refused to comment publicly, but leaked letters revealed generations of guilt. One letter, dated 1954 but only released online in 2024, contained a chilling passage. "We are haunted not by ghosts but by truth. Every time a child is born into our line, we wonder if it is truly ours, or if we are raising another woman's soul." That revelation ignited a storm. Was the bloodline itself cursed, forever doomed to question its own legitimacy? Genealogists tried to map the family tree, but strange inconsistencies plagued the records. Whole branches ended abruptly. Others were erased without explanation. It was as if history itself had conspired to keep the stolen child's identity hidden. Meanwhile, the local town had turned the ruins into a source of grim tourism. Candlelight tours guided thrill-seekers along the broken foundations, warning them not to step near the nursery's remains. Guides told the story of the pact, then extinguished their candles at the threshold, daring visitors to listen. Many swore they heard soft humming in the dark. In 2025, a researcher uncovered something extraordinary in church archives. Baptismal records showing 2 infants christened under the Countess's name in 1831. One bore the family crest beside its name. The other had a faint cross, as though marked for secrecy. The discovery added new weight to the legend. 2 babies tied to one mother, yet history had space for only one. Coffin ultimate modern twist. Paranormal investigators who returned to the ruins that same year claimed they encountered both children, not as infants, but as young figures standing side by side. One clutched a silver rattle, the other a broken doll. Their message, caught faintly on audio, sent chills worldwide. By late 2025, scholars, spiritualists, and amateur ghost hunters all seemed to converge on one shared question. Could the curse ever be broken? Some argued that the stolen child's remains had to be found and laid beside the Countess's own child. Others believed the pact was unbreakable, an eternal punishment woven into the fabric of the dynasty's bloodline. Regardless of the theory, the ruins themselves seemed to resist closure. Every attempt to restore or demolish the grounds ended in failure, as if unseen hands were guarding the soil. One chilling account came from a group of construction workers hired to reinforce the foundations. As they dug, they unearthed a small coffin no bigger than a shoebox. Inside lay nothing but ash and fragments of lace. Moments later, the sky darkened despite clear weather, and the entire crew fled. None returned to the site. Local clergy tried intervening with rituals of blessing, but the strange manifestations only escalated afterward. Parishioners reported seeing the ghostly outline of a woman kneeling in the church at night, cradling something that wasn't there. Her face, when glimpsed, was a mixture of agony and defiance, as though she could not forgive, nor could she let go. By winter of that year, the estate was officially sealed off by authorities. Yet thrill-seekers still slipped inside, leaving offerings for the restless spirits. Baby shoes, swaddling cloths, rattles. Some items disappeared overnight, while others were found shredded to pieces. The dynasty's last living descendant, a reclusive woman in her 70s, broke her silence in an interview. She admitted she had been haunted since childhood by dreams of two infants crying in harmony. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "I don't know if I belong to her blood or to the woman they wronged. All I know is that we are none of us free." Coffin-closing horror twist. In December 2025, a storm toppled the last standing wall of the nursery. Journalists who visited the ruins the next morning claimed that, in the rubble, they found two impressions in the earth. Small, perfect, side by side. Like the bodies of two infants who had finally lain down together after nearly 2 centuries. Even after the storm of December 2025, when locals swore the cries had ceased and the curse had ended, the land refused to return to peace. For weeks, the ruins remained silent, drawing curious crowds who believed the souls had finally been laid to rest. But soon, new disturbances emerged. Visitors began to report a different sound. Not the cries of infants, but the faint echo of a rocking chair creaking back and forth. The rhythm was steady, deliberate, as if someone unseen still lingered to watch over the empty nursery. Those who dared to stay longer claimed they heard a soft voice humming a lullaby. Unlike the anguished tones of before, this melody was gentle, almost soothing. Yet, beneath the sweetness lay something unnerving, as though it belonged to a mother who would never forgive. In early 2026, a paranormal research team brought advanced thermal cameras to the ruins. They captured what appeared to be 2 small heat signatures lying side by side on the ground where the impressions had been found. But when they returned days later, the signatures were gone, replaced by a tall, singular figure kneeling at their place. Her arms were outstretched, empty, waiting. The town became divided. Some believed the curse was broken, that the babies had been reunited at last. Others swore a darker entity had been born from their union. A spirit stronger, more vengeful, carrying the grief of both mother and child together. Legends grew of travelers who passed the estate on moonless nights and saw a woman standing at the gate, holding nothing in her arms but whispering, "Choose, which child will you save?" None who heard the question ever answered, for those who did were said to vanish before dawn. In 2027, the state attempted one last time to bulldoze the ruins for safety. On the morning the machines arrived, the lead excavator's engine refused to start. When the workers inspected it, they found the driver's seat covered in a fine layer of ash, like the remnants of lace burned to nothing. The project was abandoned within a week. Coffin eternal twist. Historians concluded that the pact of 1831 could never truly end. The stolen child, the dead infant, the Countess, and the grieving mother had bound themselves into a cycle of betrayal too deep to erase. The family dynasty might have crumbled, the estate might have rotted, but the curse lived on, woven into the very soil. Anyone who dared disturb it risked becoming part of the story. Even now, locals warn, if you hear the sound of a rocking chair in the dark, don't look back. For somewhere in the shadows, the Countess still rocks her stolen child, while the real mother waits, watching, empty-armed, forever asking, "Will you give him back to me?"